You're watching CNN Newsroom live from Los Angeles. I'm John Bors.
And I'm Isa Suarez in London. Ahead this hour, the latest twist in the court battle over Donald Trump's travel ban, as some families are reunited and others wait and wonder about what comes next.
Next stop for the U.S. President Donald Trump's executive order on immigration, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. 3 judges will hear arguments on Tuesday on whether the temporary stay issued on Friday should remain in place while all the other legal challenges play out. We get more details now from Sarah Seidner.
John, the 3-panel judge here telling the parties involved that they will have to have their oral arguments ready by 3 p.m. California time, 6 p.m. East Coast time, so that this case can go forward. Those oral arguments will be available to the public. They will stream it live on their website. Meantime, there are plenty of families here on pins and needles waiting to hear what the court decides. The scenes of tearful reunions from San Francisco to Washington, D.C., as people from 7 predominantly Muslim countries rush back into the United States.
Even though my family already came here, we feel for all those who are still in limbo.
After being temporarily banned by Donald Trump's executive order, hundreds of visa holders are trying to legally get into the U.S. after a federal judge temporarily stopped the president's travel ban.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Washington and Minnesota sued the Department of Justice, arguing the ban discriminates on the basis of religion and harms the states irreparably. Federal Judge James Robart, a George W. Bush appointee, took up the case.
That the state has met its burden of demonstrating that it faces immediate and irreparable injury as a result of the signing and implementation of the executive order.
And with that, the travel ban came to an abrupt halt, albeit only temporarily, as the court hears the merits of the case. President Trump quickly responding to the order in a series of tweets, writing, "The opinion of this so-called judge, which essentially takes law enforcement away from our country, is ridiculous and will be overturned." The Department of Justice is appealing to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, the DOJ asking for an emergency stay to put the ban back in place while the case goes through the court system.
They make one argument that I think is quite unusual. They say that their harm, the harm to the public, if you will, is the process of judicial review. The harm is that the court intervened and issued a stay. You don't usually see that as harm. Our constitutional process is supposed to let judicial review happen almost always.
But the Department of Justice also makes some very strong arguments about the president's authority to protect the borders and to keep out anything that is a danger to this country. They also think that the federal judge overstepped his bounds because his order affected the entire nation. John?
Sarah, thank you. Joining me now, CNN's senior political analyst Ron Brownstein and civil rights attorney Brian Claypool. Brian, first to you, could there be a compromise here in the works? The Department of Justice seems to be willing to at least allow those who already have visas, who have been inside this country, who may be outside the United States, to not be affected by the ban, at least temporarily.
Well, John, I think that's the right thing to do. And remember, there are two issues. There are 2 issues at the forefront here. The panel of 3 judges in the U.S. Ninth Circuit, they're only handling one of those issues right now. Remember, there was a temporary restraining order issued by a United States District Court Judge, Robart. That means, in effect, that the executive order issued by President Trump has been suspended. And that's what the 3-judge panel is going to rule on tomorrow. And my prediction is that this 3-panel judge is going to uphold the suspension of the execution of this executive order pending judicial review of the constitutionality of the executive order. And that gets into the second part that hasn't been adjudicated yet, and that is going to be at the core of this issue of whether what you just asked me is whether people who, for example, have visas from one of these 7 countries who are currently in the United States, are they going to be required to leave the country eventually? And my guess on the second issue, John, is it might be a split decision. It's going to be a tough decision for this panel on the constitutionality of this executive order. Because if people are here and they're on a visa, both under the First Amendment, under the Establishment Clause, and under the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause, an argument can be made that you cannot discriminate against these folks based on a religion, and we cannot create a law that unduly favors one religion over another.
Ron, there's been so much criticism of the way this executive order has rolled out, the implementation of it, the lack of consultation with many of the departments involved. There's also this growing list of states which are now suing the Trump administration. With regards to these states taking legal action, is that the way forward over the next 4 years? Is that what politics will look like in this country?
I think absolutely. I think no question. You know, we saw this really develop under President Obama, where the Republican-controlled states, the Republican attorneys general, systematically went into court on many of his initiatives, the Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act, the Clean Power Plan to deal with climate change, transgender bathroom guidance from the Department of Education, and most relevant to this case, the effort by President Obama to extend the legal protection he provided to the Dreamers, young people who were brought here illegally by their parents, to adults, to undocumented adults who had citizen children. What happened in that case was a coalition of Republican states led by Texas filed suit. A single district court judge, just as in this case, ruled against the administration action on a nationwide basis. It went up to the Fifth Circuit, which is as conservative an appellate court circuit as the Ninth Circuit is liberal. That decision was upheld by the conservative judges there. And then it went to the Supreme Court, who didn't take it up, and ultimately President Obama was stalemated. And that is the risk that President Trump now faces with the Ninth Circuit, which is probably the most liberal of the circuit, 2-to-1 Democratic appointees overall, and potentially at the end of that line, a divided Supreme Court. So I think, yes, the answer is that clearly the political competition is not only, in effect, horizontal, an executive against Democrats in Congress, it is now vertical, where you're going to see Democratic-controlled states moving very aggressively to try to resist this Trump agenda and, in effect, open a second front against him.
Brian, we saw over the weekend that Donald Trump lashed out at the judge who ordered the initial stay, called him a so-called judge, warned of national security compromises. Will that kind of thing, will that make it harder for the Department of Justice to win this case?
Well, I think it does make it a little bit harder. And also, it's not a prudent thing to do, John. Remember, President Trump has a business background. I think his heart's in the right place here, by the way. I really do think he wants to improve security throughout the United States. But we're not in a boardroom anymore. You've got to deal with two branches of Congress. You've got to deal with, remember, the U.S. Constitution. There are parameters within this presidency. There are boundary lines within being the President of the United States. You can't simply look at a federal judge and say, hey, you're a so-called judge. You're not a good judge because you're not agreeing with me. You're fired. I mean, this isn't the way to handle, in my opinion, the beginning of a presidency. I think President Trump has to try to do, for example, why doesn't he go and work with Congress on creating new, more effective laws at vetting immigrants and refugees coming from every country across this world, not just 7 Muslim nations?
Well, there are a lot of questions for the Trump administration, a lot of challenges this week as well. Ron, thank you very much. And Brian, thank you for being with us as well. Appreciate it.